various different styles, and one style whose popularity makes us, I think, question the state of the world is the John Oliver, arrogant British accent speaking to an American audience style. It is popular by clearly many people. It's popular. I think it's popular especially among the people who really want to believe they're super smart but can't quite convince themselves. And if they watch John Oliver and laugh when there's that moment when you're supposed to laugh, then that proves that they are smart enough. So if you've watched John Oliver, you've seen him go on long satirical rants about companies for making money, about Western countries for having freedom. And of course, Israel is a target of his, not infrequently, including about a month ago when he decided to do a show about the West Bank, and basically, in a nutshell, explain why settlements are the reason that there is war. It's not exactly how he put it, but it is kind of how he put it. Now, I should mention John Oliver, others have done videos about him, and he or HBO or whoever it is, sends copyright strikes to people, so we can't play his stuff, although we would love to play it and then pause it. But we did that in our own time, in the privacy of our own homes, and now we are going to bring the best of John Oliver's thinking to you on this show, and we will put a link to his show in the chat so you can watch it, and in the description so you can watch it and see if we are perhaps misrepresenting him, and maybe he is in the right. But yeah, before we get into specific points, let's get any initial thoughts. Richard, you sound kind of like John Oliver sometimes. I mean, not in content. I mean, just in accent.
Should I get my coat? It's so offensive. When you were doing the comment about, British accents earlier, I thought I might have to change mine up a bit. I mean, I did find we spoke last week about Mehdi Hassan, who's also British. All right, he's not a comedian, although, yeah. Well, but we've got an endless supply of these bell ends, frankly, that we've shipped out to the rest of the world, including America. Most of them come out of Oxford and Cambridge, and seem to believe that they are the bee's knees, even when they're clearly not. I find that listening to this kind of stuff is really strange. I find it a really odd mix, to be honest. And the audience reaction to it is there. It's not really laughter, is it? It's a sort of smug chuckle, like a smuckle, a sort of a it's sort of a knowing laugh that is just makes your skin crawl, to be honest. And of course, the only time that they genuinely laugh is when you get to the comfortable reassurance of a Willy or a fart joke in amongst the history lesson of why the Jews are evil.
Let me just quickly say for our American audience, you can go on Urban Dictionary, look up bellend. I'm sure you'll see what it means. Marco.
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with the Big Ben and the Westminster Tower. Yeah, I mean, until yesterday, probably I've never heard about this guy, I must admit. And researching it, he actually comes across as somebody who's not perhaps consciously or not as a name, is kind of linked to journalism somehow. And that's what makes the piece particularly bad, because he effectively exploits this aura of journalism that seems to be attached to him for some reason. And he makes a few points with some jokes that, as you mentioned earlier on, a bit like a kind of Stephen Fry version, the stupid man's intelligent person, the kind of person that says something which sounds, kind of makes sense, and then therefore because he plays for your team, you're just gonna laugh and be merry and agree with everything he says. But the kind of stuff he says is actually quite appalling. If you actually listen to what he says, even the way he says it, I didn't find it funny at all. It was half an hour that felt like 2 or 3 hours, and it wasn't enjoyable. It wasn't funny, especially because you could find it distasteful making jokes about the situation in the Middle East right now, but you could joke about it because it's not beyond, it's not a holy war. It's not something that nobody can talk about. But if you do it in a clever way, just doing the way he did it, which effectively is taking aside the Hamas side and running with it, and effectively laughing at everything which um, seems to go against any attempt to stop Hamas from destroying Israel, is the butt of the joke, which is so weird, so weird.
Michael, you spend about half your time in the US. When you're away, do you always think, wow, I really have to get back so I can watch John Oliver in prime time on HBO every whichever day he's on?
Well, watching almost anything on HBO that pretends to be news is dangerous because it's remarkable how the media. I mean, I've said this before. I don't understand the end game of the Western media because clearly they seem to want to cause terrorism to blossom and to enable Iran and its proxies and everything. And soon they'll be, saying how great a place North Korea is. They basically equate Venezuela and Cuba with the U.S. the way they talk about things. I think the biggest problem with John Oliver, and I never listened to. I mean, I listened to him for about a minute about a year ago, and then it was enough to know I didn't want to listen to him. Is that he does come across as someone who's well educated and understands things. And you really have to listen carefully to understand the doublespeak and the omissions. And he does a lot of good jobs on omissions, things like talking about, and then there was a war between Israel and the Arabs. Well, the Arabs occurred about 6 countries, for example, and the war started because all 6 countries attacked Israel at the same time. So he didn't lie. There was a war, in fact. But to quote our famous president, ex-president of Harvard, it does depend on the context. And it does matter who started wars, just like it mattered that Nazi Germany started the war against the Allies. Yeah, I think he's a despicable person, and he is part of this elite group of people that loves to walk around, with their security details, telling everybody we have to let in all kinds of illegal immigrants, and all terrorists are good because they're freedom fighters, and so on and so forth. It's all a continuum of the same. We understand things, do as I say, not as I do. And I got to leave now because my private jet is going to leave in about 2 hours.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Yeah, the point, Michael, that you made was actually one of the first points I was going to go to, so I'll go to it first. He says at some point that Israel was established through the War of Independence, or what the Arabs call the Nakba. Well, no, Israel was established, by a decision of the UN, and later, like within a minute or so, he talks about international law. So international law, we've spoken about how it's not a real thing. It's a thing that's convenient when it's convenient. It's clearly not convenient to remember that Israel was established according to this so-called international law. And then the Arabs decided to attack Israel, the country that had just been founded. So, yeah, the disaster, the Nakba, was the fact that Jews are suddenly living here. That was the disaster. And that's the disaster in the West Bank. Now, look, there are settlers in the West Bank, and we're going to get into particulars, but there are settlements that are, super religious people, clearly risking their life and so on. But risking their life because they think they're on some sort of mission from God, which I think is unfortunate. But the fact is, if Jews living in the area where Arabs are living is an impediment to a possible peace, then there is no possible peace, because you're not going to have peace with the Jewish state if you can't have Jews anywhere in your vicinity, and that seems to not compute for many of the people who say that the settlements are an obstacle to peace. Richard.
Yeah, and that's where he warns us at the beginning that he's going to give us a quick history, that edits out all the bits where the Arabs were bad and leaves all the bits left that makes the Jews look like they're a bunch of meanies without any cause to be mean, as if they just, they're mean in their blood, is the impression he's given. And yeah, it's the way he does the 1967 war is exactly a case in point. And of course, he refers to, at the beginning of the show, he talks about very quickly, as you're always, contractually obliged to mention it quickly and say it really fast, like a piece of T's and C's at the end of an advert, the brutal attack on October the 7th. Right, moving on. Now we're talking about the West Bank and the occupation again. So, and he does that a couple of times. Just to make sure we've heard it. And of course, he pulls one trick later on where he talks about the number of people killed in terrorist attacks or killed in attacks in the West Bank, and talks about two sets of numbers. I may save that for later in case we refer to that later on. But yes, this is the standard, and we've seen it in a number of forms. You see it with what Mehdi Hassan was doing a week ago, or you see it with what any of these commentators do. There's a set narrative where lots of the awkward bits are dropped, and awkward to if you want to represent the truth, that is, and you're just left with the one-sided approach that by drip and by repeat, forcing it down your throat, you're so expected to learn like your times table.
I mean, this guy is so evil. I mean, you cannot think that he's just making a mistake or is in good faith and he comes across badly, because one of the things that these crypto Hamas supporter jihadi fighters are doing all the time is like, yeah, but October 7th was bad, but blah blah blah. This guy mentions October 7th twice, the terrible things happened on October 7th, just to make sure he comes across as a balanced guy. But not once he mentions the hostages which are still held by the Gaza, by the very people he's trying to paint as the victims here, by the very group of people who's dead set in destroying the state of Israel, because they never accepted a two-state solution, because they do not want a two-state solution, and they make it quite clear over and over again. And again, it goes down the route that the two-state solution is something to be working towards. So the peace is in constant dangers because we are not working towards a two-state solution. But the point you picked up about the word independence is also again mirrored later on when he says, then came the 6 days war. Like Jordanians and Egyptians were just minding their own business when the war came along and decided to open up its stall and start destroying things around. It's like, what the hell? The kind of contest drop that this guy is indulging in is incredibly. I mean, you cannot talk about an issue like this and taking the naked side of one of the two parties and just trying desperate to paint Israeli as the bad guy at every turn, not even trying to look somewhat balanced.
Michael.
Yeah, I have to admit, I have very great difficulty finding any justification for almost anything that Hamas has done or the Palestinian Authority. It's very clear that there are places in the Middle East, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, that have decided to put aside Islamic jihad. I mean that with the sort of small letters, and Islamic militancy, and try to form some semblance of a country that could interact with the rest of the world and invite people in for tourism and so on and so forth. So it is possible to be an Arab country and a Muslim country and interact with the West and not want to exterminate the West, or at least not blatantly say you want to exterminate the West and the goal is to form a caliphate. I don't see any of that from either the Palestinian Authority or Islamic Jihad. And what's really disgraceful about Oliver and all these other so-called informed, educated elitists, and who cares where they were trained, frankly, because they've learned what they spew is despicable. And it doesn't provide a future for either of the people that are under Palestinian Authority or in Gaza. And it only will cause more wars because Israel is not going anywhere. And what's despicable about them is that they do know better. And they think somehow that by supporting this unsustainable set of beliefs that leads to nowhere, I don't know. I don't understand where they're going. So the fact that you cannot stand up and find a single thing that the Hamas has done well for the people in Gaza, and you can find very little that the Palestinian Authority has done for the people living there, the so-called Palestinians, which is a made-up term, is a problem. Now, one other point: the fact that Hamas has an explicit charter calling for the elimination of Israel means that anyone talking about a two-state solution is either a moron or just lying. Because Hamas, the other side of this, that is, the other people we're supposedly negotiating with this two-state solution, has already said they don't want two states, as you gentlemen both said so nicely. The reason they don't want two states is because they've already said that Israel has no right to exist. And frankly, Jews have no right to exist. They also say that the West has no right to exist. And they do say death to America. And they do talk about taking over the entire world and establishing a 7th century Islamic caliphate again. Now, all of these people know that. All of these intellectuals who have so-called studied, they all know all of that. But they want to pretend that you can go in there and make a deal with people like that. To quote Blinken, Blinken was surprised when Hamas was not negotiating in good faith. What kind of an idiot says that a terrorist organization was not negotiating in good faith and that they're surprised? It, frankly, and I'll have one more comment, it's the same kind of surprise that everyone has that Hamas just killed 6 hostages. Hamas killed a lot more of the hostages before 2 days ago. This was agreed just because Israel was getting close to rescuing those hostages. But Hamas had done in 50 or 70 of the hostages that we know about, and probably another at least 50 more. This is a terrorist organization. All they do is terror. And every one of these elites knows that, but somehow wants to portray them as poor victims.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chats. There's a comment in the chat by, I think, a troll who shows up from time to time. If you reference the UN being part of established Israel, why now say it's an anti-Semitic organization? Moving goalposts is gaslighting. I mean, there's so much wrong with his comments. First of all, it's like saying, if you're pro-America, how can you be anti-slavery? No, organizations change over time. I'm not saying the UN was good at the time. This was maybe the only good decision they've ever made. But I was making a point about John Oliver's presentation, which was dishonest in saying that Israel was established through war. It wasn't. It survived war and continued to exist after the war, but it was established in part because the Jews accepted the UN partition plan and the Arabs didn't because they can't accept Jews living. That's what happened. And in the context of somebody who talks about settlements being against international law, I pointed out that it didn't match what he had been saying moments earlier. Anyway, yeah, so we at some point he talks about the Oslo Accords as this moment where it seemed like there would be maybe peace, and he did this thing that you mentioned, Richard, where he says, I don't have the exact word, but it was something like, well, the peace process hasn't moved forward or something like that because of settlements, Palestinian terrorist attacks, and like he had a pause after settlements. He didn't have a pause after terrorist attacks and went right to, I think it was the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, who signed the Oslo Accords. Now, just for historical accuracy, that is not what, on Israel's side, that was not the problem with the Oslo Accords. What he doesn't mention, by the way, was what the Palestinians did immediately after the Oslo Accords were put into place, which is use the territories under their control to better plan and execute terrorist attacks against Israelis, and the fact that Rabin, had he not been assassinated, would have lost in a landslide the next election. He had no chance of remaining in power because the Israeli people, were happy that there's peace, and then they saw the results of that peace, and then they weren't so happy with that. So yeah, it was the fact that the peace was done, the so-called peace deal was done with terrorists, and the result of it was the same as every deal done with terrorists by Israel ever since, and it was more death to Israelis. But yeah, like you mentioned, Richard, we'll get later to that, the numbers that he gets into, but he does seem to completely ignore the fact that it is the Palestinian people who have chosen war to be their only method in achieving their goal, which is the elimination of Israel. Richard.
And of course, but he always include whenever anybody from the left mentions the Oslo Accords, they always put up the picture of Bill Clinton, the heart of the handshake, doing his very best as a good Democrat to solve the world's issues, even if it lasted, no time at all and was flawed from the off. But always get that in there. That's guaranteed every time. I think, yeah, it's his method here that is so telling, isn't it? How he uses history and stuff. I think even if you've got anything like an alert mind, and you are seeing this for the first time, or seeing somebody do this technique for the first time, it already poses a whole bunch of questions. It feels like there's enormous holes in what you're being told, even if you don't know what those holes contain. So, I mean, one of the things when you're hearing all that is to do some work yourself and to explore what is missing, because it just seems like you're being given edited snapshots that don't link together, which are stitching together a narrative which you can smell the falsehood in it by the way it's put together, and that sort of that sense is something always worth exploring. And then you can see whether you're right or not. You can see what those gaps are or not. So, I mean, but by now I've got a potted history of Israel from inception to today, with all its dates to make sure that I know where we are on the scheme of things and which are the bits to be missed out. I mean, it's as relevant last week when talking about Mehdi Hassan as it is today. And this framing of it is just so insistent. That it is having an effect, because in the absence of people being taught properly elsewhere, objectively, the truth, this is where they're picking up their sense of the conflict, whether it's through films that depict things, whether it's through comedy like this, whether it's through the kind of news presentation that your MSNBC will do, or whatever. All of it is taking the place of properly informing people, and the result of that will be more death.
Margot, let me just quickly say, PB Law asked, are you guys going to discuss in an episode the UK MP got better treatment by a Palestinian doctor due to a pro-ceasefire vote? We did on Friday, I believe. Was it the Daily Objective or the reality show? Does anybody remember? One of the shows on Friday was on this topic, so yeah, that was already covered. Margot.
Yeah, for the lucky people who didn't watch this clip, the guy is talking to camera, and next to him there is a slide that he uses to play a series of disjointed clips from people we don't know who they are, where they come from, why are they saying the things they're saying. But nevertheless, every time he makes a statement, he runs a little clip or shows you a picture of something which is supposed to presumably prove his point. And we all know that the picture is an argument. You can just win a war just showing a picture. This kind of not being able to think with your own head and just believe a picture because somebody puts it in front of you is a kind of feature of today's society, isn't it? But one of the things he shows, if you see the thumbnail of this episode, he actually shows the security wall that the Israeli put up to stop the attacks from the lovely Palestinians. With the war, what's the war? West Bank. So just to show the level of just to remind you of the Berlin Wall. We all know the Berlin Wall was bad. So this it's a wall separated into things, it's got to be bad, you know. It's beyond the evaluation of it. But one of the clips he plays is it's a shot from a headline from the AP, Associated Press, which talks about how Israel is turbocharging, the words are turbocharging the occupation of the West Bank. And this very news, I actually looked it up, is such a weird way of using a headline, and such a weird word to use by a news agency, turbocharging. It's actually, it turns out that about 20 or 30 different media outlets, papers, I think the Los Angeles Times and others, reprinted the same very article, same very title as it was. So effectively, they take orders from the mothership and they run with the same news. They spread the word as far and wide as they can, and this goes to show how well coordinated these pro-Hamas, pro-jihad, anti-civilization people are. They clearly have an intention of spreading lies, spreading one side, and help Hamas fighting where Hamas cannot actually reach, where Hamas haven't got the ability to bring the war to the West. They'll take upon themselves to actually do their job. And that's exactly what people like this John Oliver do all the time.
Yeah, by the way, Margot, I kind of feel bad that you've only just discovered him, but I will send you some more of his stuff afterwards on various different issues.
Looking forward to that.
Do we need to add his name to our Candice list?
Probably.
Actually, it's interesting because I said about Candice, you know, she does when Michael and I did a show about her a couple of weeks ago, at some point in the show, I was thinking, you know, are we going too far? Because she looks like she might actually be like have an actual problem. This guy doesn't have that excuse. He is fully aware of what he's doing. Michael.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that my two sons, who are 25 and 21 now, experienced in high school was history by anecdote, which means you find a story that proves your entire point, and that is what's reported as history. You don't worry about the grand scheme of things and the larger picture. And, you know, John Oliver would never show a picture of the night spot bar place in Tel Aviv that's right on the water there on the Mediterranean, that was blown up by the very people that the wall had to be put up to block. He will never show you a blown up Israeli bus with dead kids, women, and children, because the only dead women and children, of course, in John Oliver's book in the Middle East are Israelis killing Arabs, according to John Oliver. But this notion of history by anecdote is extraordinarily dangerous. It's the same thing that the Democrats use to say that we should abolish all crimes, because occasionally criminals are improperly put in jail. So therefore, the entire justice system needs to go away because there was a mistake. We should abolish all medicines, because every medicine has a side effect and some people are really badly affected by them, and we should stop doing anything, which is the natural extension of all of this. And you simply cannot do anything in the world when you're worried about single events in the grand scheme of the totality of evidence. It's just completely ridiculous. And, you know, he showed a picture of this Jewish, you know, of course, an overweight Jewish guy in a yarmulke arguing with this poor, besotted Arab woman and displaced, who he took over her house. Now, he's never going to put up a picture of the people in Gaza who took over all of the Israeli houses when the Israeli military forcibly evicted the Israelis from the Gaza Strip so that the Palestinians could take the area to have as their own. They'll never show you that. But that's the danger, of course, of anecdotal history. And as we've said on the show, Marco and Richard beautifully put it, these people know better. They know. They actually have learned the bigger picture history. Certainly anybody that's our age was taught history in the big picture. There were some good Germans, but the Third Reich overall was pure evil and needed to be obliterated. But the current group of people would tell you that we have to worry about the good Germans, not the evil Third Reich. This is the level of this insanity and where it's headed. And I think when people watch these folks, and why anybody watches them is beyond me, but when I watch them, it should really go through your head. I don't want to know about one person. I want to know about the number of terrorist events that Israel has perpetrated in the West Bank against Palestinians. And I want to know about the number of terrorist events that the Palestinians have perpetrated against Israel. These numbers are vastly different. I'll let you all figure out which side the numbers come down on.
Well, I mean, people watch him for for knowledge and dick jokes, as mentioned. That he has plenty of both, and ice cream jokes. By the way, I don't know if we'll get to the ice cream jokes, but Ben and Jerry's is they make ice cream, so it seems pretty benign, but no, they are an evil organization. Like they are truly evil. So and we have, I believe, done episodes about them in the past, but maybe another one is due. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. At some point, John Oliver talks about the difference between settlements and outposts. So settlements are approved by the government or created by the government, and sometimes they're villages, sometimes they're full cities. Whereas outposts are when Jews just take over a hill or something, and by takeover I mean it's just a hill. There's nobody there, and they set up something, which which is risky. And by the way, Michael, you mentioned how the media doesn't just hate Israel; they hate the West as well. That's another thing John Oliver throws in there a few times, saying it's like what America did. Yeah, America was also founded by people. Homesteading was a big thing, which I think John Oliver would probably oppose.
Because the British never colonized anybody.
Oh no, he spoke against the British as well. Yeah, he speaks about everybody. Everybody in the West. He doesn't speak about the people who attack the West. But he mentions the outposts, and one of the things he says about the outposts, they're officially illegal, and he says, but the government still provides them with certain things. And one of the things he mentioned was military defense, which I thought was pretty amazing in several ways. First of all, if you settle some land somewhere that you're not supposed to against the law, that does not mean that you're no longer entitled to military defense. The military is supposed to defend the citizens, and that's part of it. But there's also, I mean, that's its job. But there's also the issue that he doesn't give much time to Palestinians and what the Palestinians actually do, which is terrorism. But he does kind of mention this as a thing that is done and or is given to people in outposts, and the question why, I guess, wouldn't arise in the mind of most of John Oliver's fans, but it should. And then at some point he mentions the checkpoints. I mean, he talks about the checkpoints extensively. He talks about how he shows Palestinians talking about how humiliating it is to have to go through a checkpoint. At no point does the question come up, why are there checkpoints? Because, of course, if you don't ask, you can just say, okay, these are the Jews being evil to the poor Palestinian victims. Whereas, if you look at what actually happens with the checkpoints in place, which is terrorist attacks or attempted terrorist attacks daily coming out of the West Bank towards either Israeli settlements in the West Bank or towards the rest of Israel. This is a daily occurrence, which is, again, not brought up at all when he talks about checkpoints and military defense. Richard.
Yeah, I mean, when he mentions the checkpoints, he mentions at one point there's a Palestinian guy who's complaining about the fact that he has to remove some clothing in the face of a 16-year-old checkpoint officer, who's demanding it, presumably to check that he's not carrying weapons or explosives or whatever. They sound really threatening, these 16-year-olds. They're really scary.
Yeah, I should mention they're not 16 years old. That's a lie. And by the way, that person is the mayor of Ramallah, or the former mayor of Ramallah, which is
Well,
the
it's
de facto
because
capital.
it's because they use 16-year-olds, so it's normal
Yeah.
for them to assume that a 16-year-old is a soldier. Yeah.
Exactly. 16-year-olds are used by Palestinians. But again, John Oliver lets this guy talk and confirms basically what he's saying without but yeah, continue, Richard.
Sure. I just wanted to say something in relation to what Michael said earlier about history by anecdote, because when I was learning history at school, it was the point when how history was taught was utterly transitioned from how it had been taught prior. It was no longer about learning the full sweep of history and understanding the full events. It was about being given a primary source of a piece of diary from somebody during the Blitz or whatever, and having to analyze it like some amateur historian, but some amateur historian with zero knowledge of the wider picture of when this was written and why, or some letter home from somebody in the Bastille and having to talk about the French Revolution or whatever. And the problem with that is that without the understanding of the big picture, you are being trained just to focus on what you're shown, which is we will show you something. That is your source of information. Your entire knowledge will be extrapolated from that. And that's the danger of ending up where we are now, with people's inability to recognize that they need multiple different sources, and more than that, they need an understanding of the big setting in which they're looking at something in order to understand what this particular piece of footage or whatever relates to. Certainly, I can back up what you said about him sneering at the US, because the one time that he throws up a picture of the US flag is just to sneer at it in the middle of it. I did read on Wikipedia about him that at one point, when he was trying to come back into the country after being outside for a bit and needed his visa renewed, that one of the immigration guards said to him, "Why should I let you back into my country just so you can insult it?" He then admitted he was joking, but I mean, it's a fair point, isn't it? Why should you, by many means? I think, well, I'll let Marco go from here.
Yeah, and of course, he mentioned the fact he's British, therefore he has a go at Britain as well for spreading civilization across the world. Teaching most of the world the rule of law, how to be civilized, building infrastructure, railways, setting commerce, this kind of terrible things that has made people rich. But it's something we should be ashamed of. That's terrible. Going back to the checkpoints, he mentioned how walls, and he says a maze of checkpoints were set up between Israel and the West Bank. Yes, and he also mentioned the two-tier justice, where the criminal system in Israel, which applies equally to Israeli or Arab people who live peacefully in Israel, and the military justice that occurs outside it. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. If you're in a war area, of course, your justice system will be different, because you're not dealing with criminals and civilians breaking the law. You're dealing with war criminal, terrorism, and people use violence as the means of achieving their goal, which is extermination, or the other side. And then again, the checkpoints were there for the same reason why we still have the 200 milliliter rule at the airports, why you can't travel freely across places, because people like the lovely Palestinians, inspired by the Islamic jihadi ideas that Michael was talking about, like setting up medieval structures and going back to slavery, effectively. That's what they practice currently. It means that we have to protect ourselves somehow, because you don't stop a Buddhist monk from blowing up a school or a concert with kids. You don't stop a nun or a monk blowing themselves up, because they tend not to do it. If somebody does that, it's usually motivated by the kind of ideology that puts death and war as the main value, as these people do on a constant basis. And of course, again, he never mentioned the fact that the the lovely Palestinians are lobbing rockets, not missiles. Missiles are guided weapons that hit a particular target. They lob rockets that hit Israel indiscriminately. And we saw what Hezbollah did when he killed loads of children playing football. And that's the kind of care that the Palestinian put into attacking Israel. They don't care who they attack, who they kill. They just want to kill. Anyone will do. Let's move on.
Michael.
Well, I don't have a lot to add. I think, you go and you listen to the people representing Hamas, and they said, we did October 7th, we're proud of it. We're going to continue to do it until Israel's gone. And they also said that the more dead Palestinians, the more Gazans that are dead, killed by Israel, or frankly, their own bombs, they don't care. Because remember, they blew up their own hospital area, the better. That martyrdom is what you want. And that's what is so difficult to understand. We need to have much more clarity in the West that when you're cheering on a terrorist group, you are cheering on a group that believes death is more important than life. Now, I think that's great. If a group of people believes that death is better than life, let them have at it. But don't bother me. And don't bother the West. Because the West is about life. Our first principle in the West is life, then liberty, and then pursuit of happiness, to paraphrase the American Declaration, but similar across all of libertarian and liberty-ish thinking, starting with John Locke and so on. And there's a lot better philosophers and historians than I am in the audience. But the concept in the West are that life is to live and flourish. That is exactly opposite to the Iranian doctrine, all of the Iranian disciples' doctrines, against North Korea's doctrine, frankly, against Russia's current doctrine, etc. Why are we in the West so afraid to defend that? Why are we cheering on these people? And the last point I want to make is along these lines is when students are out there, especially now, when students are out there supporting the Palestinians, we need to stop believing and faking that they're actually supporting these poor, destitute Palestinians. They are supporting terrorists. They are saying that you have the right to do whatever you want if you're oppressed in any way. It's like saying that a criminal has the right to do whatever they want, no matter what they did. If you are an Islamic militant, by definition, you want to destroy the West. That's the definition of being an Islamic militant, and you want to establish Sharia law and an Islamic caliphate. That is unacceptable because it is incompatible with my liberty. Full stop. Until someone can explain why an Islamic militant how they could coexist with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, there is no conversation that's worth having, in my opinion.
Thank you, Jonathan, for another super chat. Thank you, Mumu Joe, for the super chat. Enric says, yeah, and I saw this earlier, though not in the Guardian, but Enric says, current Guardian headline, Biden says Netanyahu not doing enough to secure ceasefire with Hamas. I think that's, I saw that, and I was thinking in the context of, yesterday after the bodies were recovered, I can't remember if it was Biden or Blinken or somebody from the U.S. said Hamas's leadership must pay, and apparently they meant must be paid, because I don't know how else to read that latest comment. By the way, a couple of years ago on a visit to New York, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I was thinking of going to be in the audience and taping of John Oliver's show. But you had to be 3 times vaccinated, and I was only twice, and you had to wear a mask, and I was not going to sit there with a mask on the whole time, so I didn't follow up any further. Anyway, back to the topic. All right, so one of the things he talks about is Hebron, and the Jewish settlement in Hebron, which is an Arab city with a small Jewish settlement in there, and we see an incident of violence by somebody from the Jewish village towards somebody in the Arab village, which happens again. Those are very, very religious people who live there. But what he's missing, which is always to me one of the biggest tests when people talk about the settlements as an obstacle to peace and it being against international law and so on, is Hebron, because the Jewish village in Hebron, the Jewish settlement there, has been there for hundreds of years, hundreds of years. So, I don't know, if international law is very specific about Jews just not being allowed to live where Arabs don't want them. But otherwise, there is no argument you can make about the Jewish settlement in Hebron being in any way illegitimate. But of course that didn't come up, nor did it come up. The Jews had been slaughtered repeatedly by Arabs in Hebron. So yeah, we know that Palestinians sometimes get attacked, and that's very much the theme throughout this. He brings up Palestinians. He shows video clips of Palestinians talking about how they're victims. He shows a couple of Israeli settlers of the worst kind to show that they're the bad guys. And he brings people who are even worse than the settlers of the worst kind, which is Israeli experts who are anti-Israelis living and operating in Israel against Israel's very existence. As experts, he uses B'Tselem, and of course B'Tselem footage. We've talked on this channel about B'Tselem footage. B'Tselem is an organization that its crowning its major project in the past couple of decades is to give Palestinians video cameras so they can video abuses of them by settlers, which is of course very easy to make happen. You could just, you can attack, and then you can start, you press record, and then the world will see how you are being abused. So again, this is, as journalism goes, this is very consistent with what we have seen in the mainstream. Should we go to the numbers thing, because we are almost out of time? There was at some point he said, yeah, look, yeah, Israelis are sometimes the victims of Palestinians. Between 2008 and 2024, 150 Israelis have been killed. But in the same time period, 1,522 Palestinians have been killed, most of whom by Israeli security forces. And that's it. That's it. There's no question. So this very much is the kind of genocide narrative with the genocide narrative reasoning, which stops at presenting a number rather than asking, if Israelis wanted to kill all Palestinians, why is it only 1,522? If it's security forces, what does that say about who may have been killed? But of course, those are not questions that John Oliver wants his audience to be asking. Richard.
Yeah, in that article that we referred to earlier about turbocharging developments, settlements in the West Bank, there was pictures that showed whether it was the Associated Press article that led with it or a bunch of the other viruses that had spread out into the media and used the same headline. They showed a picture in each case of people wrapped, corpses wrapped in an Islamic jihad flags. As if you're supposed to have sympathy for people wrapped in Islamic jihad flags and not understand why they wrapped in those flags. Because they're terrorists, mate. It's quite simple. But yeah, that's missing from it all. I think a lot of the reporting you said earlier about mentioning Biden, for example, I mean, a lot of what you're seeing at the moment, you'd think Netanyahu was the guy holding the hostages. Because I mean that's all the bit in the middle is skipped out, isn't it? It's his fault, and of course by extension is Biden's as well. The other source that he goes to repeatedly is, as well as B'Tselem, is Vox. With all that's one of the sources he uses a lot of the time. But again, it's this primary source material. It's making sure that people can only focus on a given moment, and he uses this technique of getting people to calmly explain or simply lay out to the stupid Israelis why their lives are so miserable and mean. But of course, that is never done for Israelis to say, well, you know, having people come in and murder you in over 1,000 of number and take hostages and kill your children and abduct your family. Explain calmly and slowly to you why that's a bad thing, because you seem to have totally forgotten that.
Yeah, it's not only the numbers that it's used in a dishonest way, but also the way he throws comments like the relentless expansion of Israel. Well, if Israel wanted to have territory under its belt, it wouldn't have returned the Sinai Peninsula in the first place. It wouldn't have given Gaza back to the Gazans in order for them to set up Hamas and try and destroy Israel again. So all this kind of statements are totally out of context, are totally false and totally made in order to smear. Because whatever happens, he said that there's a relentless expansion going on, so people just take it as read. And these numbers again include all the people that blow themselves up at checkpoints, people trying to ram cars into the checkpoint and kill Israeli soldiers. So these numbers mean absolutely nothing if you just look at the number itself. And this whole piece, it was done on a incredibly one-sided and trying to represent only one point, and we know terribly well which point it is. The point that, as we said earlier on, you know, the people want to destroy civilization, but for some reason we lend a hand. And the way he likes to use this this joking and fun comments and stuff like that, but he also made a joke about Netanyahu aligning himself with some wacko evangelist guy. And I'm all for taking a piece out of these religious guys, absolutely. But take the piece also after Allah and its the people who worship that thing. What about showing a picture of Muhammad and laughing at it? Shall we do that, or that's too funny for your audience? You don't think they can take it? This kind of one-sided attitude betrays what they really want and what they really tell to their audience. I hate Israel.
Michael.
Well, the other thing he went into was the whole the whole very elegant lecture on the A, B, and C regions in the West Bank, and I can tell you, having actually been in the West Bank, which I don't know that he has, but if you go in there, you generally, both times I've been, we switch to a bulletproof vehicle because you get shot at. Now, guess which areas of the West Bank you get shot at? Well, the area A is the Israeli area. You don't get shot at in the Israeli area. You get shot at in area B, which is less likely, or area C, which is extremely likely. And it doesn't really matter what you look like. You just get shot. I mean, the bus that I took the first time I was there actually had bullet holes, and it was area C, where it had been hit. So, and yes, they were holes. It was a bulletproof bus. The holes went mostly through, but none of the windows were cracked, etc. So it really, am I getting my areas mixed?
Yeah, A is Palestinian.
A is Palestinian. So it was the area A that we, I apologize. And B is the mixed area, but Israeli security is supposed to be there. The last point I'll make is the notion of Hamas or West Bank / Palestinian Authority security is an absurd notion. You can't have terrorists in charge of security. What does it even mean? The word security means you're secure. If you're, let me be blunt, if you're a gay person and you're in the Palestinian area, you're in trouble if you're outwardly gay. There is no security for you. If you're in the Israeli section, you're secure, just like you're secure anywhere in Israel if you're gay. So we all need to stop listening to these people because they're really corrupt. And if you do listen to them, please think about it. Please see if it makes sense and if it tracks with other things you've heard. And the last point I'll make on, if you don't have much time, is why don't you hear about Google and Intel and Microsoft and Apple having great buildings in any of these countries that our elites seem to be so thrilled with, Lebanon, Syria, etc. Why don't we have groups in those areas? It's not because of Israeli oppression. It's because these groups are anti-intellectual and anti-progress. You have these buildings are plentiful across Israel. And it's the old joke, if you want to boycott Israel, you better give up your smartphone, almost no matter who makes it, and so on and so forth. So please, folks, please think about all of these things and ask yourself, does this make any sense? And then delve into it.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Thank you, Tron77, for the super chat. Tron says, anti-Semitism is in vogue again, coloring most Western media coverage. Thank you all, gentlemen, for your work. Thank you. Thank you, Mumu Joe, for the super chat. Mumu Joe says, the people that celebrated October 7th, the students that hold Free Palestine signs, the Muslim co-worker that posted that Hirsch was an Israeli soldier and therefore a fair target, all are as dangerous as Hamas. Yeah, you know, viewers of this channel, people who only watch this channel will not be familiar with this experience, but sometimes you watch a video and you look at the timeline and you see that it's like towards the end and you think, okay, good, it's almost over. That was my experience with this video when I first watched it, but then it gets to the end and you think it's almost over, but then you get to you think it was bad enough until then, until he says that he brings up the never again slogan and says this could mean two things. This should never again happen to the about the Holocaust to the Jewish people or to anyone. And the Israeli government clearly means that it should never again happen only to the Jewish people. In essence, John Oliver wrapped up this episode by saying that Israel are Nazis and that they are doing to the Palestinians what the Nazis did to the Jews. Again, this is a guy who earlier on said 1,522 Palestinians had been killed over 16 years in the West Bank by Israelis, mostly by Israeli security forces. He very quickly at several points in the episode acknowledges that there are terrorist attacks by Palestinians, that October 7th happened. He didn't elaborate as to when such attacks happened against Germans. He didn't elaborate as to where are the gas chambers that Israel is sending Palestinians into. He didn't explain how a population that is going through a Holocaust is growing. Many questions were left open there, but again, John Oliver trusts his audience to know better than to ask questions of John Oliver. Parting thoughts, and where can people find more from you, Richard and Marco?
Yeah, parting thoughts. Well, I mean, he didn't mention the Munich Olympics. He didn't mention hijackings, did he? And as you say, that very quick moment when he skates past the burnt out buses. Yeah, I mean, my parting thoughts are just this technique of going at 100 miles an hour, carpet bombing you with lies, slowing up for a dick joke, and then carpet bombing you with more lies, and ending on this bit that you mentioned there that incites rapturous applause for the fact that we're all against genocide, and of course we're all also by inference all assume that that Israel is causing it because it's not against the Jews. So it's an unpleasant finish to an unpleasant half an hour, to say the least.
Yeah, it would be nice if this kind of people had something good to say. It's not just criticizing the other side. Just tell me, what do you want? Do you want Hamas to be left in peace to destroy Israel? Come out with it. You know, don't keep pussyfooting around. Anyway, if you want to find out more, you can go to the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this one, and go to Substack and see what we've been up to.
And Michael, final thoughts, and where can people find you?
Yeah, I think, you know, Biden blaming the victim again. 6 more Israeli hostages, which is what it should say, were now murdered in cold blood by Hamas. That's what the headline should say. And Biden says Netanyahu is the obstacle to a deal because Netanyahu wants to keep troops on the border with Egypt so that weapons cannot be smuggled in to Israel again, into Gaza again. My apologies. You can find me at LinkedIn, Kaufman, 2 Fs, Michael. Thank Thank you.
I'm Razi Ginsburg on X. We will be back here tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Cheers. Bye-bye.